Welcome, everybody. Thank you for attending our webinar. Today, our panel will tackle the topic of strategy and why we need to treat it the same way we do our products. We have actually a chock-full session today, so I'm going to try and get through the introductions, the intro part, as fast as possible. But before we jump in, I just want to say on behalf of the product stack and the panel that we'd like to acknowledge that these are unique times, and that we hope that you and your loved ones are safe and well. And on a technical note, if since most of us are most likely dialing in from home, if there's any if you all are feeling an abundance of lag time or whatever with watching this, we will tell the panelists to turn off their video feeds. So let's just jump right in. I gotta make sure I'm on the right monitor. So this webinar is brought to you by the Product Stack. We are a fellowship of companies that are that banded together to create this group to support product managers. We are, in essence, your PM support group. So this community was brought to life by Product Plan, Pivotal Tracker, and Jama Software. If you have not done so already, we encourage you to check out all of our products. But more importantly, we'd like you to check out theproductstack.com, where you can catch all our past webinars. And also, something that's rather successful is we have a great Slack channel that is supported by our community, and where we also address a lot of questions that we don't get to live in this webinar. And something else that we've done recently is we also have released a newsletter called PS from the Product Stack. And that is also a place where we hope to answer questions that we don't get to live in this webinar. So theproductstack.com will take you to both of those places where we can sign up for the Slack channel and for our newsletter. And just as an FYI on that, Henry submitted a question for this webinar that I actually answered in the last newsletter. So I think Henry's question was, in building a product, are the customers always right or usually right? I take a stab at that question in that newsletter. So a shameless plug there. A few other things for this webinar. In general, our webinars are very interactive, and we ask that you chime in and submit your questions. There should be a question section in your middle management panel here for GoToWebinar. So please, during the course of this webinar, don't hesitate, submit questions there. And we have people that are going to be answering them live. And whenever possible, we will try and pull your questions into our webinar. And secondly, what we're doing a little bit differently this time, we're also going to be doing an interactive game as part of this webinar. So one of the things we'd like you to be mindful of is, if you can, if you've got a pen and paper or a spreadsheet that you can access now, we'd like you to avail yourself of that, because one of our panelists is going to take you through an interactive strategy game, and you will be tested. So anyway, let me jump right into our next slide. My name is Ron Dunlop. I will be moderating this event today. I'm the head of marketing for Pivotal Tracker. I've worked on other productivity tools, Cohuman being another one, and before that I was an agency person. But I'm thrilled to be moderating this panel. This is an expert panel that have all done these webinars in the past before, so I'm happy to introduce our three panelists, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, following the order that we have on our little chart here. So, Adrian, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Adrian. I'm from France. I'm a product lead at VMware. I've been building product for a while all around the world in many countries, in South America, in Australia, in various parts of Asia, particularly Japan. And now I'm based in Denver, and I help the Pivotal Tracker team by leading the product practice here.
Thanks. Kevin.
Yep. Hi, I'm Kevin Steigerwald. I'm the Director of Product Design for Jama Software. I've been building product for almost 15 years now, which is scary to think, but been doing this kind of for a handful of companies of all different sizes. I had my own startup, which eventually got acquired by Jama Software, which led me there. So hopefully can bring a good range of experience and past strategic conversation into this one today.
Fabulous. Annie, hi.
Hi, everyone. I'm Annie Dunham. I'm the Director of Product Management at Product Plan. have not been building products quite as long as Kevin, but close, and across a variety of industries from telecom to just software, hotels, resorts. And I've seen strategies go really well and I've seen them go less well. So I'm excited to talk to you about that today.
Awesome, thank you. So just a quick agenda. So thank you all for introducing yourselves. I think that strategy is a rather broad topic, and so we're gonna make sure that we are all on the same page as far as terminology in a second, and then we're gonna have Adrienne's gonna play a game with us, and we're gonna ask you to be involved. So pay attention, have your spreadsheet available, and then we're gonna go into an in-depth panel discussion where we will hope to bring in some of your live questions, but also we're gonna reserve time at the end of this webinar to address as many questions that have been submitted as possible. So please be involved. So one of the things that we're going to do also as part of this webinar process is we tend to throw out polls. So there's going to be 2 polls actually today, but this first poll helps us know who's attending. So I'm going to push a poll your way right now. Launch poll. And my wheel is spinning because I am doing this from my home computer. Huh.
I see the poll. I see the poll run.
Okay. I'm glad somebody else is chiming in. There we go. Okay, great. So I'm going to wait until there's a certain percentage of people that have responded. All right. Give it a few more seconds. While you all are very fast on the button here. So we have, I'm going to wait till we hit the 70% mark. Excellent. All right. For the rest of you, I'm going to close the poll, share results. Okay, I've got the spinning wheel.
I'm seeing them. We've got 64% product managers, 13% product execs, 4% engineering and executive, and then 14 other. So excellent. Good mix, but product managers are bringing us home.
Yep. So you are in the right place, and thank you to the engineers and others who are there. So let's jump right into our discussion here. So, questions were also submitted at the very beginning of this, so maybe we can start off with one of those questions and then also address this, our core thing. So, Adrien, Ramprasad asked, what differentiates a strategy versus mission versus execution plan? So maybe, you can tackle that and we can start getting a level playing field here on terminology.
Okay, at a really, really high level, your mission is something that would bucket in your overall purpose, where you're here in the world, what difference do you want to make with your team. Often the purpose comes before knowing much about the customer and other things. That's what you see a lot in entrepreneurship in particular. Strategy is really the art of finding and exploiting leverage in a competitive landscape to achieve your purpose. And the execution plan is really what comes after that, is how do you enact and iterate and learn through your initial strategy and evolving strategy. That's how I would define it at a really high level.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, and then I'll chime in there. So I think, as Adrian mentioned, the idea between a mission and a strategy are often very confusing for folks, and I know it's something I constantly mess up and still mess up to this day. I read a book that I would recommend to everyone who's interested in strategy. It's called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. And one of the key lines, it's in the first chapter. I promise I've read the whole book, so I'm not just quoting the first chapter, which I sometimes do. But it's just, it says, simply being ambitious is not a strategy. And I think that's something that we often see happen when people are confused between a mission and a strategy. And I think KPIs then can help us, because a strategy then is really, the mission is the high level. This is our vision. It's tied to the vision of where we're going to be, who we are today, and where we're going to be. Strategy then needs to be a little more tactical in terms of how you're going to get there. And if you see a strategy that has a number in it or a metric, it's probably not a strategy. And that's where I would challenge everyone to think about, you have KPIs to test your strategy. And I think that's what a lot of our conversation is going to be about. A quick example I'll give is I was at a previous company where we were in a big strategic meeting, and the strategy was thrown out that we wanted to be the #1 player in the space. And then we sat for about 3 hours trying to define that. And I'm like, this is not a strategy. This is a vision. The strategy should be, what are the tactical things we're going to do? Do we need, and this is where you start then looking at things you want to measure. And so that's where your KPIs come into it. But it's, how much time are we spending, or money are we spending on marketing? How much time are we spending at, low quality events where we are, missing out on opportunity to be talking to high profile customers? So those become the strategy. Let's spend more time, more dollars on marketing. Let's go to less events this year and focus more of our energy into sales. And then you create KPIs based on those strategic initiatives, and that tells you how you're doing. And so that to me is a good lesson that I live personally, of kind of understanding the difference between mission, strategy, and KPIs.
Yeah, I agree, Kevin. Yeah, and read the book. It is fantastic. And one of the things that they talk about in the book is that Kennedy didn't say we were going to go to the moon just because he was dreaming big one morning. He said it because he knew we had the tools and the levers to pull to get us there. So strategy really should have a sense of realism to it. And I think there's a reason we talk about it in that hierarchy of mission, then strategy, then execution, because strategy uses some of the same methodologies as execution, but some of the ambition that comes from mission. So what is it that, if you align behind it, what really are your levers? And then, as Kevin was saying, how do you know if you're actually succeeding? If you just say, we're going to be $1 billion company and watch the money come up and down, there's not a whole lot of control there. But if you look at it a little more tactically in terms of your market or how you're going to serve needs of your customers, you can really define a strategy that can succeed.
Awesome. Thanks, Amy. So let's jump into the game. And we're going to hand the reins over to Hadrien for the next couple of minutes. Referencing an old movie, shall we play a game? I'm not going to do the voice. Hadrien, we're going to hand over to you. The panel is going to be hanging out for a second, but they'll be back and join the conversation really soon.
All right. So as we've just discussed on the panel, there is a clear difference in level of abstraction between your strategy and your product. If you think about KPIs, for example, it's really obvious where that line is. And in real life, it's really hard to step away from those product KPIs and then think about the underlying more important fundamental assumptions that your plan relies on. So in this game, we're going to sort of abstract away the product piece, and we're only going to focus on the strategy piece. You'll still be building a product, but you will not make any decisions whatsoever about this product. So you're the CEO of an online coding school, and your purpose is to help the world get better at programming. So you will all be the same sort of CEO, but you'll have a different company. And we'll ask you to make decisions that relates purely to strategy and not to your individual product. And next slide, please. So I can't see the slide yet because there's a bit of lag, but I think I know what's coming up. So you're in the field of web holograms, which is a science fiction. It's a science fiction game, and this field is starting to gain a lot of traction. And products are being released to empower users to create holograms on their websites. So essentially, what it looks like is it's a hologram that pops out of your screen and do the all sorts of cool animations. I don't know if we can see it now because again, I can't see the slide, but I imagine you'll all see something animate. This, by the way, is a real innovation, but it's a kind of bulky screen. So imagine your flat laptop screens and this thing popping out. That will give you a sense of what a web hologram looks like. Next slide, please. So essentially, this game is going to be you in front of your board of director, trying to convince them to make an investment in this nascent industry. And each year, you have to decide for which framework you will invest in. So we're going to look at the history of the market really quickly so you can familiarize yourself with what has happened before you start introducing this concept to your board of director. So this is the timeline. In 2020, Amazon is essentially has built a product called Amazon Holo, and it's a comprehensive set of JavaScript libraries to build, render, and animate your holograms. In 2023, Twitter released Twitter Leia, which only focuses on animating your holograms, and it loads faster than Holo by several milliseconds. In early 24, when our game is actually starting, Alibaba has released Alibaba Spectre. It's similar to Amazon Holo, but it loads faster by a few milliseconds. So for all of you who are not engineers, this game doesn't require much technical knowledge, actually not at all. And you can go on with just the data that I provide for the game. All of those products are fake. All the logos are fake. I just want you to know that those are not real products. So now, if you have a piece of paper and a pen or a spreadsheet, I'm going to ask you to draw this table without the little crosses inside, so you can follow along and play the game with us. Essentially, the way it's going to work is every year, I'm going to ask you to forecast what's going to happen the next year. So we're going to start in 2023, and I'm going to ask you to bet on which framework is most likely to win the following year in terms of like market adoption, because you have an online school who's producing articles and videos about how to learn those frameworks. And if you bet on the right one, and it's the one that gets the most adoption, then your videos will get more traffic. You will help your customers learn the right framework faster. So each year I'm just gonna ask you to put a cross, and at the end, we're gonna have the same table with scores, and you'll be able to do simple math to calculate how much your score was. It's going to go fairly fast, so I'm going to ask you to make your decision pretty quickly, and at the end we'll explain like one way this game can be solved. Next slide, please. All right, when I see the slide up here, okay, perfect. So we're going to go. So this is an example of what each slide is going to look on each year, except this particular slide is about from 2020 to 2023. And you'll have to guess what's going to happen in 2024. Okay, so it's always going to be the same slide. You're going to have Google Trends, Stack Overflow, and GitHub displayed here. And in the bottom left corner, you'll have Hacker News posts, just the title. In Google Trends, you'll see relative search popularity. You'll see in yellow Amazon Holo, in blue Twitter Leia, and in red Alibaba Spectre. This particular year in Google Trends, you can see that Amazon Holo is dominating by a really wide margin. In Stack Overflow, it's even more pronounced because we can only observe Amazon Holo in terms of popularity. And on GitHub, you can see that Twitter Leia is getting a lot more adoption, particularly in 2023. So what Google Trends represent is the overall popularity by search. Stack Overflow is a platform for developers to ask and answer questions about a particular programming language, about a particular programming problem, and all sorts of ecosystem questions. GitHub is a platform that essentially hosts open source code. So imagine Google Docs, but for code. And you can observe contribution from everywhere around the world around a particular piece of software. So those are targeting different populations, and they're helping us sort of get a sense of where the market is going. Hacker News is a really popular, it's essentially the equivalent of a Reddit, but for developers. And you can see a lot of articles every day that are curated around various topics. So for the year 2023, the top Hacker News posts were things that suck in Amazon Holo. Do we really need web hologram frameworks? And Khan Academy moving to Twitter Leia. Okay, so often you'll see that those article titles are fairly opinionated, which is common on the internet. Again, those are fake titles, but I think they represent pretty well what it could be in reality. All right, so now I'm going to ask you to use your spreadsheet or your table and try to make a bet for 2024. Which of the 3 frameworks do you think is going to be most popular? I'm going to give you 30 seconds to think through this. Let you put a cross in the 2024 column for one of the 3 frameworks. All right, now your decision has been made. Let's jump to 2024 and look at what happened. All right, so you can see in Google Trends, it's pretty much a continuation. We're starting to see Alibaba Spectre pop up because it was launched essentially this year. Stack Overflow, it seems there is accelerating growth for Amazon Holo. We still can't observe developers asking and answering questions about Twitter Leia and Alibaba Spectre. And on GitHub, there seems to be an acceleration for all three frameworks, with Twitter Leia being widely dominant. On Hacker News, we can see Yahoo Mail is moving to Twitter Leia. Removing UI complexity or white Twitter Leia is awesome, and no more web hologram frameworks. Okay, so that gives you a picture of how the market is evolving. And now you have to guess what's going to happen for 2025. So which frameworks do you think is going to dominate across the industry? I'm going to give you 30 seconds to make your choice. Put a cross in the 2025 column. All right, by now your choice should have been made, and we're going to jump to 2025. All right, so now things are starting to evolve a little bit. In Google Trends, we can see Amazon Holo is starting to experience essentially decelerating growth, while Twitter Leia and Alibaba Spectre are experiencing accelerating growth. On Stack Overflow, we can see Amazon Holo has a flat growth roughly, or slightly diminishing, while we start being able to observe Twitter Leia. And on GitHub, every single framework is accelerating. Amazon Holo, though, is accelerating a little less fast, and Twitter Leia is really accelerating fast. On Hacker News, we can see, is Leia really fast? I won't be using Holo for my next project. And the viability of web hologram frameworks on mobile. We can see the market starting to expand in various directions. It's no longer just your laptop. All right, I give you 30 seconds to make your choice.
Too much, 5 seconds.
All right, 5 seconds. All right, you should have put a cross in the 2026 column. Let's move on to the next one. All right, 2026. So now things have changed pretty dramatically across the board. In Google Trends, Twitter Leia grew so fast year over year that it overtook Amazon Holo as the #1 framework. On Stack Overflow, Amazon Holo has a sort of a flat curve for last year. Twitter Leia keeps accelerating. Same thing for Alibaba Spectre. And on GitHub, everything is decreasing suddenly. Twitter Leia still has the lead, but this is becoming less popular overall. Hacker News, we can see Holo 2 is finally released. Learn Leia in a weekend and The Majesty of Spectre 2 ebook. So a lot of those frameworks are issuing now their second version. I'll give you 5 seconds this time to put a cross in 2027, and that should be the last year we were playing this game. We'll look at the result and then we'll move on to other discussions. All right, 2027, please. All right, 2027. So now the trends are mostly being confirmed, right? In Google Trends, Twitter Leia has been accelerating dramatically. Alibaba Spectre keeps accelerating as well. And Amazon Holo is now clearly #2 in the market and decreasing fairly quickly as well. On Stack Overflow, we can see the same trend just with a lagging effect. And on GitHub, we can start seeing like everything pick up a little bit, but nowhere near the level it was in 2025. Okay. And the last post we'll look at on Hacker News are Spectre versus Leia, why I moved from Holo to Leia, and all web hologram frameworks are terrible, a case study in confirmation bias. All right, that's all for our game. Now I'm going to tell you how to compute your score. All right, so here's the table. So in 2024, Holo would give you 3 points, Twitter Leia 1 point, Alibaba Spectre 0 points. I'm going to ask you to use your last row that says score, and then you should be able to just tell us how many points you got if you add every single year's score. So the maximum you can get, I think, is, let's see, 9 plus 4, that's 13 points. That would be the maximum, and the minimum is probably 2 points. So you're going to be somewhere in that spectrum, and we're going to ask you soon in a poll how you did. So once you have your score, be ready to submit in the poll what was your final score, and that's going to help us in the analysis going forward. We'll give you another 5 seconds to compute your score. This should be really, really easy math if you follow the instructions so far. All right, and Ronan, can you maybe display the poll for our viewers? Awesome. So you can either have somewhere between 2 and 5 points, between 6 and 9 points, and between 10 and 13 points. And it's important that you're as honest as possible for my analysis, because if everybody got 13 points, then maybe my point will not resonate as much. All right. Ronan, can you let us know what's the participation at this point?
Yeah, you know, so right now we've got 61% voted. I'm gonna wait. I've got a bit of a lag on my end, so we'll just see. Give it another second or so. We're doing good for time, so I'm just want to give it. All right, I'm gonna give it another second, and then we will close that out. All right, I'm gonna close the poll.
Awesome.
And share the results.
Let's see what kind of results we got. Okay, that's perfect. All right, so we had 11% of folks between 2 and 5 points, 36% between 6 and 9 points, and 53% between 10 and 13 points. So what's really interesting in this set of results, and I run this this exercise with a different group, and we got fairly similar results, is that almost half of the folks didn't get the maximum number of points. If you think about your day-to-day jobs in product and defining your strategy, independently from like how great your product in itself is, those results mean that probably almost half of the companies or the coding school that were involved in the game would probably die at some point in this story. And that would really reduce the competitive field by a lot. And that's just by making decisions of which framework to build against. So when we're going to look at how to solve this game, we'll see that they're in many, you can get it wrong in many places essentially. And it's really fascinating that just for those decisions that are not even the product itself, you can get it really wrong. And so I'm really glad people participated honestly and gave us those results, because now we can really talk about what does it mean. All right, so fun fact, this game is actually based on real data, despite me saying the contrary since the beginning of the webinar. It actually is based on real data from JavaScript web frameworks, which are essentially a way to build single page application like Facebook and others. And it's based on 3 real products, Angular that's made by Google, React that's made by Facebook, and Vue.js, which is made by another company. So all those GitHub, Stack Overflow, and Google data are actually real. And if you go to the next slide, it's even funnier because the posts on Hacker News are actually real posts. So the thing that sucked about in Amazon Hollow is actually the things that suck in Angular. And the internet is pretty brutal, so if you want to go and look at those particular posts, I don't recommend it, but you can do it. All right, next slide. So what's interesting is that when you look at those 3 curves that we were looking at, they actually have a sequence. They don't peak at the same point in time, and they don't actually address the same population. There is a nice framework that I recommend you investigating called the 3X framework by Kent Beck, who invented extreme programming. And during his time at Facebook, he identified that different types of population and different types of practices were addressed by different cycles in the product lifecycle. You all know the product lifecycle and its bell curve, but actually if you zoom in the real world into how that bell curve is articulated, it's a combination of multiple bell curves. And it's in math, we would say it's a fractal. Next slide. So the way to solve this game was actually to think through in which order are those curves behaving. GitHub represents the open source community. It represents developers who are modifying code for their own benefit. Often they're going to be first to modify a thing and use it because it's still rough around the edges. It doesn't work well for everyone. And if you aggregate all those curves, it's going to peak in 2025. Stack Overflow is the next thing because it addresses the more general developer population who are asking and answering questions to actually use those products off the shelf. They're not modifying it. And Google Trends represent the overall curve of everybody, every single stakeholder in the ecosystem is just searching online for this thing called web hologram or web frameworks if we're thinking about the real data. So if you take them in reverse order, think about GitHub first, Stack Overflow next, and Google Trends last, then you start getting the answer because those curves are peaking in different years. GitHub basically peaks in 2025, and it tells you exactly the opposite of what the rest of the market is telling you. So you found an anomaly. Stack Overflow confirms in 2026 that trend, and you can see it overall peaking in 2026, and it tells you, hey, Twitter Leia is really getting a lot of traction. React is getting a lot of traction. And in 2029, the product lifecycle is fully formed, and all of web holograms or all of web frameworks are starting to plateau, and it confirms what you've seen before. So being able to identify the details of how the market is behaving in different population and different use cases will give you a better chance to guesstimate or anticipate what is likely to happen later.
Awesome, thank you, Leanne. So let's bring the panel back into this discussion. So I know you shared a lot there, and there was a lot of stuff. Do you want to kick off this discussion, Leanne, like how you identify early adopters and why did we use this as the first slide that we were going to address?
Yes, it's going to be pretty much a repeat of the last slide, but it's really like, first of all, every company is not going to have to deal with early adopters at all time, right? This is really to find new growth. But in your career, it's likely that you will have this challenge in front of you. I would more ask you to consider, how is your market behaving right now? What have been the cycle of adoptions to get you where you are? Or if you're looking forward, is there a path that has been charted before for other innovations? What I've been showing you for web frameworks actually work for machine learning libraries and most softwares that have an open source component, so you can rebuild that curve for yourself. You just have to think it like, what is the order? What are the customer needs? And what is the value chain for this?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll jump in and add to that, where, you know, I think what's really important about the exercise that we just walked through, which I scored an 11 on, by the way, just throw that out there. Just in case my boss is watching, I know I'll keep my job. But the sources in which you're gathering that information, right, is going to change from, and I think that hopefully that's rings true to folks, that this exercise was not about, okay, go start looking at Google Trends and GitHub for your product, but it's, you need to be able to identify, you know, those areas where you do have early adopters, and this could be whether you're a brand new company or an existing company. Which in our case, you know, we've been around for over a decade, and we serve, you know, a pretty central segment, but a piece of the product development lifecycle for our customers. And there are edges where our product doesn't necessarily hit immediately. And for us, those are the areas that we start to look into, trying to find early adopters. And in the thoughts of, do we want to grow into new areas that our product doesn't serve, or should we go back and focus on our core until we start to see them? And so the way we start to identify that, and rather than using Google Trends and GitHub, we're looking for our customers and listening to our customers who are doing analog workflows and kind of trying to recreate those in the tool. And they run into these blockers, and then they ask us, hey, can you build this feature? Hey, why doesn't the tool work this way? And oftentimes our response is, well, because our strategy, you know, a good strategy should let you say no. I think this is something, Ronan, you talked about a lot in the email as well, is listen to your customers, because while they start to push on your strategy, it may be very easy for you to say, no, we're not going to go build feature X over here because our strategy says focus here. But in reality, that may be one of your early adopters saying, hey, this could be a big opportunity for you. Let's look into it. And so that's where we start to pull a lot of that data and run it through a very similar exercise that we just went through, just with different data sources.
Yeah, I want to toss a question to Annie. So there's a question that came in. Justin asks, strategies can get stale over time, which I think is what you were getting at, Kevin. And what are KPIs that help inform whether it's time to revisit the core messaging? So I don't know whether you can give specific KPIs. I think it's probably different for every company, but maybe that person can ping you separately on our Slack channel. But yeah, strategies can get stale over time. So, you know, how do you deal with that? I mean, do you have to change your KPIs? You keep the same KPIs? I mean, that's...
Yeah, It's a great question. I think it's a challenge a lot of people run into because we are backfilling our strategy with KPIs. It's much easier if you're able to start there. And it's certainly easy to identify bad KPIs for your strategy, like just really general, are we making money, isn't really good to validate if your strategy's right. There's a lot more going on. So if we take actually what Hadrian walked us through and go a step backwards and say, okay, why are we going into the web hologram market? Why is it that we as a school think we need to teach this? There were indicators there, and whether it was Google Trends, it was things happening in GitHub that were an indication that this is where the market's going. That's where you start to build those KPIs. Why did we think this was a strategy in the first place? What were our assumptions? And are our assumptions proving to be true or not? And you need to be able to ask that of your strategy to be able to come back and say, this is getting stale. We're not actually accomplishing what we were hoping to accomplish.
Awesome, thank you. I want to kind of still stick on this question though. There's also another one that came in, I'm not sure who it's from, product road mapping or OKRs, which is better? Do we have to choose? I'm going to toss that out there.
I would say in terms of identifying early adopters and trying to meet their needs and look for new opportunities, I think you need both, right? Your roadmap should be being fed by data, and OKRs play a role into that, and KPIs. So I think it's, could you get by with just one? Maybe. Is it better to use both? Absolutely. So I don't know if I would ever recommend choosing one over the other.
All right.
And I think just a quick note, I think one can be in service of another, and they can support. Like having alignment's really important, understanding why anything that's happening, whether it's on marketing efforts or product efforts, and how it's moving you closer to your strategy is really important. And in an ideal world, your roadmap reflects both what you're doing and why you're doing it.
I'm going to toss this one to Hadrian. So there's also a question from Seema. Maybe we can go back to this and we can be more clear, but what is the difference between product KPI and strategy KPIs? And what are some commonly used product KPIs? So I think that's a great, simple question.
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's actually at the core of what we're talking about today. So I see the product KPI, which people are most familiar with, as the ultimate expression of your strategy, right? It's like when you start seeing customers doing things, having behaviors in your product, they can either be behavior driven, user doing X in the product, or they can be business driven. You get like X amount of subscription dollar per year, or you have other like very common product KPIs. Your strategy KPI, however, are more like underlying and fundamentals. So it's how the market is moving. So it's going to be customer needs. How many people you can see asking questions on a board, for example, like Reddit. How many people you can see adopting a particular product, which is not directly competing with yours, but that might be a product you use yourself to do your work, or you use yourself in your product to make it work. For example, a particular database structure that you're using. How is it evolving in the market? Is it going to be obsolete in 1 year? And so you'll have to do a lot of work to sort of like change to a different one. So in the end, it's really more underlying and keeping track, maybe sandwiching your roadmap between strategy KPIs and product KPIs is the right way to go, because your roadmap is based on the environment you live in. And if that environment is moving, your roadmap might have to change as well. And you have to make that determination. And your product talks about the performance in that particular context. If that is not working, you also need to ask yourself questions, as Annie was saying before.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I think I'll quickly add to that. I think another good example that can help ground it is product KPI is kind of exactly what Adrian you just mentioned. It's usage within the application is an easy example of that. Daily active users or number of users performing a feature or workflow. Whereas the strategy KPI can be, in a very simple term, go to, if you have a community or a message board where you promote your roadmap, how many customers are, voting on different things, right? Because at the end of the day, your roadmap is tied more to strategy than it is inherently just directly tied to the existing product. And so if you're throwing out, here are the 10 things that we are thinking about building next, right, there should be strategy behind why you've chosen those things. And if you're asking your customers to vote on them, that will start to surface. That becomes a KPI that is actually informing more about your strategy. Is our strategy correct? Because you already have the assumption. If I have 10 things to build, I already have my hypothesis, my assumption of which one we're going to build next. But validating that against actual data on customers is where you start to then be able to test that.
Awesome. We've actually got a little summary slide here, which I think can just close this part of the discussion. So, what does a good strategy look like? So I think that, Adrien, since you helped craft this one, do you want to just walk people through this one quick, and then we'll go to our next panel topic.
Just to recap our conversation so far, what strategy encompasses is first have a purpose, right? If you don't have a purpose, it's going to be really hard to know what you're even competing for. Then understand customer needs and how they're evolving independently from your product. Understand your value chain and how is it evolving. If you're an online coding school and you're teaching a particular language, how is that language evolving? Determine what change is likely to happen. So make a guess, as educated as possible, and then define actions against those changes. So if X is likely to change, what am I doing? What is the Y I'm doing in reaction or in anticipation of that change? And finally, and maybe most importantly, measure success and failure and course correct, so that you can understand better your underlying environment and understand better your own execution and culture around that environment, and see how performant it is.
Awesome. By your tapestry, how is this relevant to strategy?
So, okay, that's the last segment of what I'm going to be presenting on my own, and that's going to lead up to a new discussion. It's really like we've talked about what a good strategy is, but what's important is that strategy doesn't work in a vacuum. You have to communicate it. You have to confront it to the world, right? I think there was a famous general who was saying that no plan survives contact with the enemy. And here you're going to be among enemies and friends at the same time. So it's interesting to iterate on that. One thing that's important about strategy is that today in the world, and you can see it all around you all the time, it's mostly driven by stories, and we try to convince ourselves of something being right. In military strategy, the last time stories were used as the main way to define strategy was at the time of the Vikings. And the Vikings were telling each other stories on how to navigate from point A to point B. And that was essentially their strategy. So they were saying, like, at the third star in the middle of the night, turn right next to the large rock, and it will lead you to France eventually. And Vikings were amazing navigators for their time, so that was an excellent way to do that at their time. However, maps were introduced in military strategy right after that, and it changed and redefined military strategy forever, because suddenly military strategists were able to think about topology and climate to inform their decisions. So they could say, like, hey, we're going to use this hill, even though we've never been in this country, to take advantage of a higher position against an army that will be lower, because our numbers are lower, and maybe with this height advantage we can actually triumph. And so right now we need to do the same transition in business, move away from stories and more into mapping. I invite you all, I won't go into the details unfortunately today, but I invite you all to look at wordly maps as one great vector for starting to practicing mapping in your business. Wordly maps is essentially the one who introduced me to that concept of like story versus maps. And the adoption curves you saw before in the game are actually one of the concepts that drive the mapping and how to articulate your assumptions around how the market is behaving, how customers' needs are behaving, and communicate it with others so they can challenge you, and together you can build a better map.
Awesome, thank you. So we still have 16 minutes left. Let's talk about, this is another big category of questions that came in. How do you communicate strategy? And it just seems like this is one of those challenging things that a lot of product managers and executives face in general, is just communicating where everyone should be pointed and why. So I think maybe let's start with a question from an audience that came in on this. I want to toss this to Kevin. So Matthew asked, what should you do if you're inheriting a convoluted strategy that was set long before you started? Let's start there, and then we can start going into communication.
Yeah, very common. It's happened to me in various roles before. I think there's kind of a couple steps you want to do. One is you need to just unpack it for yourself and make sure, is this convoluted because I just don't understand it because I'm new to the company or new to the way that people communicate. And so I would recommend, going to your direct manager and just kind of sit down with them and have her or him walk you through, what does this strategy mean to you and how are we building our roadmap around it, right? Hopefully you're not coming in and you're the only person in product at this stage of a company and it's just up for you to solve. If you are, then you're kind of going to the CEO or whoever may have set the strategy above you. So I think that's the first step. One is you really got to unpack it to understand it, because it could just be the simple confusion of do they really set a vision, or are they using a vision as a strategy, or is this a clear strategy? And some of that might be locked internally. Maybe everyone has this inherent understanding of what these words mean because we all work as a company before. So when the CEO says X, I really understand he's meaning Y, but strategy still says X. Well, the new person coming in might not understand that yet. The other then, in terms of then just constantly communicating that, once you have an understanding of it, how can you do a better job communicating to the rest of the organization, is really start to separate then, if it is that vision and strategy problem or mission and vision, is constantly remind people of that, right? This is our vision. Here's how we're going to get there, our strategy, right? And when you are making decisions, when you are presenting roadmap, whether that's up the chain to executives, or if you're talking about it with customers, or if you're talking about it to engineering teams and the rest of your product team, is justify your decisions. And especially with the team, maybe not as much with customers, don't be afraid to very clearly indicate, and we are doing X because our strategy, is leading us in that direction, right? So constantly reinforcing that these decisions are being made based on the strategy helps kind of just everyone understand what a strategy really means and why you may be making the decisions that you are.
I think you may have answered that. I'm going to toss to Annie, but Annie, go ahead. Sorry, you chime in.
Yeah, no, I was gonna add to that a little bit. I think there's a difference between understanding a strategy and agreeing with it. And I think if it feels like a convoluted strategy, the first thing you need to understand is why it exists. And it can exist just because the CEO said so. But figuring out the why then gives you a foundation from which to build the data to contradict or to grow or expand it. And I'll give the example. I worked in a telecom where we were doing landline service, just to date myself. And the strategy was to sell more landlines to an audience, right? At a cheaper price, with more minutes, whatever it was. But as we unpacked that strategy and understood that there was government assistance, that there was a market that was underserved, that was a foundation, knowing what I know now, where I would have come back and said, listen, there's now market assistance for mobile. There's now this access for this other. I understand this is why your strategy exists. But using that same logic, we can actually potentially grow more as a company in this other direction.
Awesome. I do like to reserve a good chunk of the time for the live questions that have come in, and so I know this is going to be a jam-packed session, but if it's okay with our panel, I'm going to jump right into our live questions. I'm going to move into the appropriate slide, and then I'm just going to ask the panel to try and be as succinct as possible. If there's something that they want to add to somebody else's answer, that's great. And also, I'm going to toss out individual panelists to answer the question, but if ever you want to wave off, please say so. So I have one from Fahadrian, from Vibhan Chu. What advice would you have to create a community of clients, customers who are early adopters when a bunch of them could be competitors? Idea is to exchange thoughts, create crisp roadmap that aligns. So let me try and rephrase that. What advice would you have to create a community of clients, customers who are early adopters?
I think I really love this question. It's such a nice follow-up to the game we've been playing. So there are challenges, obviously, with early adopters. You need to find them. But once you've sort of found the core group, the behavior that's associated with them, and the problem they're trying to solve, you're really set up really well for doing what the question is suggesting, which is like creating a community, having more interactions with that group, and then I'll address the competing piece just after that. But there's never a better time than to communicate with customers than when they are early adopters, because there are very few of them, right? When we look at the charts in GitHub, you have a few hundred, maybe a few thousands after a few years of people who are really focused on that one specific set of problems and trying to solve it for themselves. If you turn the table on the competition game by focusing on the problem everybody's trying to solve, that sets you up for engaging with that community really well, because you're all focused on the same thing, independently from what you're trying to do it as a competitor. So if you, instead of talking about products, you can talk about problems, and I think that unifies everybody.
Awesome, thank you. Annie, I've got one for you, and this is from lower down on our little sheet, but I did like it, so I want to pull it up again. Since we're talking about treating your strategy as a product, Ian asks, what does a minimum viable strategy look like? One that is good enough. I mean, is that such a thing as a minimum viable strategy? I don't even know.
Yeah, I think, you know, you have to start somewhere, right? And so what is a minimal viable strategy? It's one that gives you a direction that you can validate just as much as it's one that gives you a direction as to what you're going to do. And Kevin spoke to this a little bit earlier. There's a lot of options, and being able to say, even if you're listening to early adopters, that is not what we're looking to deliver. It's a minimum viable strategy is one that can help you make decisions about what the best thing is to move your business forward, and start somewhere and refine.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. So Kevin, from Allison, you mentioned community platforms to let the community vote on the roadmap. Do you have any recommendations for such platforms? And can you talk a bit more about how to use the data you get from the votes? So basically,
Sure.
It's like pulling people in, right? So
yeah, so the platform we use is called Higher Logic. It's a great tool. It allows for, you can have a forum, you know, so our users can log in behind a subscription and have conversation. They can post ideas. We use it to post out all of our release notes and any other additional documentation. Some of that can be public, some of it can be behind, again, login. So definitely check them out. They also have a newer feature that allows for, specifically for kind of product idea submission, that then can be voted upon by other customers. And it's just a simple thumbs up, thumbs down. So it's a way, not necessarily the only way, that, you know, things start to bubble up to the top. How we then use that data, I guess, is you know, where some of the art to the science of our job comes in. And it's going to be different for everyone, but we have a system where you know, the product team proposes opportunities, and we are constantly doing this. You know, we have a standing meeting every couple of weeks where new ideas are coming forth, and we try to, you know, you can come in if you want and say, here's some random idea that I had, you know, in the shower today, and I think this is a good idea. That's probably not going to get a lot of traction in that room. The idea of this meeting is to really, you know, dig into ideas. If you come into that room, however, with an idea that, and here's some data that backs up, you know, here we have, you know, 10 times the number of customers asking for a feature in this area than we do in other, and here's more data around, you know, total available market, or here's the number of existing customers and what their, you know, dollar amounts are for our ARR, or what our growth opportunities. So like all of those things start to come into play, and it's not just how many people are asking for it, but that becomes one more mechanism that we pull into that bigger conversation. And so I think it depends on, you know, stage of your company. You may weight those things differently.
Awesome. From Seema to Hadrien, what are some KPIs that can be used by organizations that are just starting to implement product management? I think we hear this a lot, that product management is a relatively new field. So you want these PMs to look good and look smart. How do we track success for product management as an approach?
So product management is probably going to sort of commoditize over time, and we'll have more of a shared definition. But for the time being, product management looks very different in different organizations. So the first thing I would ask myself before defining KPIs for product management as a whole is, what is product management trying to solve for us? Is actually our team better equipped to solve this without product managers? Because there's a cost to product management. Often I think about product management as risk management to a large extent. Not always, obviously, depends on the company again. But if it's about risk management, how many teams have clear assumptions? How many teams are aggressively validating? Could be one KPI. If it's a type of culture that's not present in your organization right now and you're trying to introduce product management, that could be one way to go about it. Another one is if you have a product manager who's more in charge of being in touch with customers and understanding their needs. How is that changing compared to before introducing product management? And are you measuring strictly at the team level, or are you measuring at the individual level? For example, one common problem we see in organizations where you have engineers and product managers is that sometimes engineers don't know why they're building something. Can you survey the population of engineers and understand if the situation has changed before introducing product management and after introducing product management? Could be one possibility. But again, at the high level, is product management the right solution for us? Is really the question you should be asking yourself, and what flavor of it and for what specific reason.
Awesome. Annie, I'm doing this rapid gunfire because we have 5 minutes left and I'm going to go through these. So from waiting, Annie, is there a time frame to when we should revisit strategy?
Always. I mean, you shouldn't feel like things are going to change all the time, but I will tell you, start almost every roadmap presentation, certainly every stakeholder conversation, with our strategy, where we are and how we think we're going to get there, and that is a point of conversation. I think quarterly, at least biannually, we're looking at why we've made the assumptions around the strategy. We also are looking at we're constantly looking at other things that we could do and bouncing it against our strategy and seeing if it sticks or makes it shake, at which point we need to look at why we've constrained our strategy to what it is and if it needs to evolve. Now, we all need some sense of stability to move things forward. When I say evaluate it all the time, the assumption is that you're going to feel like it's still the right direction, but you don't want to be in a position where you're on an annual review of your strategy and that year goes by and you realize the market's gone in a different direction and you weren't paying attention.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm going to quickly add to that, Ron. Sorry, just because we see this too, is visiting it more frequently sometimes makes people think, well, then our strategy is going to be whipsawing, but it's actually the opposite. It's much easier to make mid-course corrections if you have your thumb on the pulse of your strategy constantly. That doesn't mean everyone in the company is involved in that conversation, but it is, oh yeah, we were pointing here, maybe we just need to point a couple degrees, one way or the other, and we're still fine. Whereas if you do it every 6 months or every year, that's when it's like, oh, we have all this new data that didn't exist, and your engineering team or your sales team who have been kind of heads down in one direction, they're going to put their head up and like, wait, what? We're not doing X anymore? What the hell? And so that's where I think everything Annie said really hits home for me.
So I'm going to ask you to follow up on that because, and also I know you got to go really soon. So talking about AKRs, this is a question from Balaji. Talking about AKRs, how critical is it to tie your product OKRs to company OKRs? And I think we've gotten a lot of questions also about that, about aligning product strategy with company strategy. And can you give that answer in 30 seconds?
No. I will say, the short answer is it honestly depends on how poorly written your company OKRs are. There's kind of two ways to write OKRs. There's the trickle down effect where, I write my objective at the top and the key results, those become the objectives for the next department, and I just trickle all the way down. When you get so far down into I'm a product manager or I'm an engineer or I'm a product designer, it's really hard to make that stair step back up to say, oh, and I know exactly if I, say I'm going to turn in 6 wireframes a week, I understand how that's going to move the needle on our ARR, right? Like those connections just don't really add up to me. I've never seen them that way. So I think it's better if you should be understanding what your role in your team, to the organization or to the department, then the organization, how those affect and the role you play within the strategy, and then write your objectives in OKRs based on, can I effectively contribute to our role in delivering software which delivers the value of the company OKR.
That's awesome. We are almost out of time. I want to thank everybody for attending. I want to thank the panelists. You guys did an awesome job. Thank you so much. We are going to continue these conversations on our Slack channel. And also we'll be answering questions that we didn't get to in this webinar in our newsletter. And the best way to access both our Slack channel and our newsletter is to go to theproductstack.com. There are links to both of those things there. Thank you all for joining us and attending. And there will be more webinars coming. We have one scheduled for May. The best way to stay on top of that is to join our Slack channel, or again, sign up for our newsletter that we are asking you to opt into, as opposed to forcing it on all of you. Have a great day, everybody, and thank you all for attending.
Thanks.
Thank you.